Hello, we're here today with Megan Fuciarelli, who is the CEO and founder of Us Squared Consulting. And I'm so excited to spend some time with you today, Megan. I've been looking at what you all do and how you do it, and it's so impressive and so interesting and so helpful for people, particularly because of my passion and the work that I'm doing in terms of trying to help educators understand more about what we can do to preserve historical literacy. I just think your work with schools and with businesses and the CARES certification is just fascinating. So I want you to talk about all of it. But if we could we just start by having people hear a little bit more about you and just kind of the personal side. So where are you, family, that kind of stuff.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Jim. I'm excited to talk with you today as well. So I'm actually zooming in today from the Detroit, Michigan area. I spent a large portion of my life in Chicago as an adult, but grew up here in Michigan and decided to come back home near my parents. You know, as we get older, family becomes even more important, and I needed to be back with them. So I came back to Michigan about 7 years ago now, and super excited to be here. As on the personal side, I have a 12-year-old son who is an amazing human, and 4 dogs, so a little bit too many barks around. Hopefully we won't hear them in the background as we're speaking today. But it's just really about surrounding ourselves with what we love the most. And for me, it's family and our animals.
Great. Yeah, thank you. And I hear the whole thing about animals. We got too many animals in our house. We just seem to keep on adding them instead of reducing them. So,
well, and I also have a bearded dragon. So, you know, we have 5 animals, but only 4 dogs. The bearded dragon's pretty quiet. So he might be on the favorites list right now.
Wow, great. So now go ahead, if you will, in your words, a little bit more about Us Squared.
Yeah, so super proud of what we've been able to build at Us Squared. We are a consulting firm that focuses on social justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Our name, Us Squared, is really an acronym for Understand Self, Unite Society. We believe that the work that we are diving into and the work that we guide our clients and our customers and our family through is about self-reflection. So we work with individuals, small businesses, large businesses, and educational systems. Having been a former superintendent and working in the school systems for quite a while, the school systems are very important to me, near and dear to my heart. And I believe that all of us, corporate as well, are impacted by the educational system because that's where we all come from. That's where we have our first exposure to learning and where we are exposed to our own thoughts for the first time.
How'd you make the transition from being a superintendent, a school superintendent? I'm going to guess there was an epiphany out there somewhere that must have hit you.
Yeah, honestly, it was a couple different things. I think the biggest piece for me is when I came back to Michigan to be near my parents who were ailing and getting older. I needed to have a little bit more control over my hours and what I was doing in the world. And I also started to realize as my son got older, he is a Black young man in America. And as he started to get older, I started to realize what I wanted to make sure I left as a legacy for him and the impact and the experience that I was providing to him and the mentorship that I wanted him to see and look up to. So when we moved back to Michigan, I decided to do this work full time, thinking I would own my job. And here we are 6 years later, and I own a company that's thriving with a team of almost 40 people. And I never would have imagined in a million years, but the transition was not that difficult for me because even in the school system, I was doing a lot of this work. So I worked with what was teaching tolerance, now learning for justice. I worked with them for many years in the school systems, and I knew that this was my passion and my calling. And again, I thought I would be an independent contractor, solopreneur. And the biggest transition has been understanding the business world, but the content and the passion has always been there.
Wow. So you're surprised by the success of Us Squared.
I'm not surprised at the success.
Wrong word. Yeah. Wrong word.
Yeah.
Right.
No, I'm not surprised at the success because we do deliver things very differently than others who are in this space. And we guide with our hearts. And I truly believe that if you lead with your heart and you're passionate, you can be successful at whatever you put your mind to. I am surprised at how it grew. And I am a person of intention, and I had no intention of this being a business as much as a passion project and a purpose in life. But I've been honored and humbled that it has become the passion and purpose for so many on my team and for people that we work with. So I think that's been the transition. But no, not necessarily surprised at the success, because we have some great people on our team.
Yeah, right. Good. Yeah, I'm interested in about a couple of things about the way that your work is configured and how you manage some of the tensions I notice in our work. One of which is, and I think I talk about this at the very beginning of the book I just put out, Gaslights and Dog Whistles, and the idea here about the role white people play in diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I'm curious, I'd like you to talk, if you're comfortable with it, just to talk a little bit about how do we continue to engage white people? Because frequently, they're, at least in my experience, they're sometimes the ones that are not sure how to engage, or not sure what's in it for them, or not sure what their role is. Right. So for me, it's always, as a practitioner, it's complicated, because on the one hand, I want to involve them, and I also don't want it to turn into something that's completely white-centered. Right. So I'm assuming you find a way to balance that in the way that you do work. How do you think about that?
Yeah, honestly, that question is so many different components, right? So I'll try and sum it up the best way I can. I mentioned that Us Squared does this work a little bit differently. And one of the pieces that sets us apart is that we believe that every single person has experienced or identified with a group of privilege, and that every single person can identify with a group of oppression or marginalization. So we do not focus simply on race or racial identity. Now, on the same aspect of that, I present as a white woman. I am not a white woman, but I present as a white woman. And I will tell you that I believe strongly that I have secured certain contracts and have been able to have certain conversations that some people on my team who are much more evident of what their racial identity is are not able to have because of the society we live in. So, does whiteness play a part? Absolutely. Especially here in America, there is white privilege, and we need to recognize what that is. And it's also about white presenting privilege, and we need to recognize that. We invite everyone into this conversation, and we do that without shame or guilt or defensiveness. Our first core principle, we have 7 core principles at Us Squared, and our first core principle is that guilt and shame are the glue that hold prejudice and stigma in place. So if we are so afraid of hurting someone that we're overly polite, that we ignore the topic, that we gloss over a subject, we're actually perpetuating stigma. We're perpetuating that bias. We want to make sure that we invite everyone into the conversation, including those of privileged identities, to help them understand how important it is for us to use our privilege to speak up for those who do not have the same privilege.
Yeah, great. No, that's great. And I appreciate the way that you seem to approach it, which is to make sure that everybody understands they're all part of the conversation. Everybody can have a seat at the table, if you will, on the topic. And you use the word privilege, which, a lot of practitioners now have taken out of anything they talk about because of in 2020, the government order that said we couldn't say those words, or the clients that hired us, if they were, federally funded, were going to not be able to continue to get funding because they were using certain words. So interesting. So 3 different parts of Us Squared. Let's start with the education side. Can you speak more specifically about the kind of services you provide there? What does work look like if somebody hires you? What's that work tend to look like?
Right. So we are fully customizable. So no one contract looks the same. We look at our menu and we follow a 3-step process for all of our clients, whether they're education or corporate. But the first step is to assess the current reality. And we assess the current reality through either an equity audit or a needs assessment or listening tours. We're actually conducting one next week in person, and 5 of our team members are going about 6 states over from us. And we are going to be in a school district for the entire week doing classroom observations. We've already implemented surveys across all stakeholders. Our team has been analyzing that data. We're conducting focus group interviews and listening tours while we're on site. And we will be able to provide a report to them that really showcases what their current reality is. We also ask them to create a self-assessment so we can identify gaps, because if they feel they're doing really well in something, but the stakeholder data is sharing otherwise, that is a piece that we need to look at. We also then, after we get that equity audit or needs assessment and assess the current reality, we come in with a professional development training plan, or what we call an equity roadmap. That equity roadmap lays out what they currently are, where they hope to be, and how we can bridge that gap. And then our last phase is coaching and mentoring. We do that in a couple different ways. For school systems specifically, we offer PLC support, or professional learning community support. We also offer administration or leadership coaching, because we believe that the best thing we can do for any of the people we work with is empower them to be the change they wish to see in the world, rather than us doing the work for them. Because as we all know, if we do things with someone and we empower them and lift them up, the message will continue much longer than if we do it for someone.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, the model of consultants as experts who do all the work it's not sustainable, and it doesn't really serve our clients, and it serves us. Doesn't serve our clients in the long term, which ultimately doesn't serve us either. So that's great.
And we also, I'm sorry to interrupt, we also with education are creating a curriculum that will be accessible. That's not fully rolled out yet. What we are doing currently with clients is working with them to write a curriculum that can be implemented in their school system. But our team is creating a curriculum that will be available large scale for districts to implement if they choose to. And that is hoping to be released in the 23-24 school year. So about a year from now, we will be releasing that curriculum.
And when you say that curriculum, I'm just to be clear, you're talking about a curriculum that has to do with justice, discrimination, diversity, equity, those topics.
Yes, the curriculum will be an interactive platform with lesson plans and student activities that will be aligned to our CARES certification, which I know we're probably going to be touching on a little bit later, but it is aligned with the CARES certification, and it is fully embeddable in curriculum as a portion that can be really just implemented and worked through with the students. There is a student portal for interaction, as well as a teacher portal for lesson plans and ways for them to support the work with their community members and family members.
That's great. So it sounds like the kind of thing that the more experience and understanding you and your associates have, the more you can build it, make it available to everybody else, and probably assume there'll be some sort of open source elements so that people can learn from each other about what works and what are best practices and all that stuff. That's excellent.
Absolutely.
What a great resource. If I'm an educator, maybe I'm saying to myself, well, I work at a university. I'm not sure this applies.
Yeah.
Have you done work with universities?
Yes, we actually have a graduate program available now. We serve as adjunct faculty for Northern Michigan University, where people can earn a master's in either education or leadership outside of education. So corporate America can also go get that master's program, where they earn their master's degree as well as the CARES certification, which is the first registered JEDI certification program in the US through the government. So we have that available, and we've also worked with multiple universities to help them prep students and to provide additional certification programs and offerings for their students before they graduate as a resume booster. And just because we've spoken to a lot of our corporate clients, as well as people we have not necessarily worked with, and they're sharing with us that the number one thing they need in the upcoming workforce is a stronger understanding of acceptance and appreciation, and how to navigate so many of the social topics right now that are pertinent to all of us.
Yeah. Megan, we talked about this in our kind of pre-conversation, and because of my book on how to stand up for discrimination, the real history of discrimination and racism in the United States, and to really stand up for the tenets of what critical race theory are about, which is just to understand the systemic nature of discrimination. I'm curious what you're noticing. If I'm an educator out there, and you're, to me, your organization and your people, one of the many things you are is your honeybees, right? You're like, you learn something one place and take it someplace else, and you're able to pollinate and really help all of us. So I'm curious what you're noticing for our audience. I'm curious what you're noticing about this topic of critical race theory and how systems are managing around it. Some school systems are deeply in a deep and difficult debate with some of their stakeholders and citizens in their community. So what are you noticing about that? What are some of the things you're seeing organizations and systems do to overcome some of the difficulties in that area?
So to overcome it is a little bit different. The first thing, just as far as what I'm noticing, is oftentimes as a society, not just an American society, but as a global society, we villainize what we don't understand.
Right. Yeah.
And I feel like because there are so many different stories and perceptions of what critical race theory is and how it could or should be used, we are villainizing the concept, or people who don't understand it are villainizing the concept. Because if we say it in a different way, if we talk about we want our children or we want our youth or we want our society to understand accurate depictions of our history, very few people will say, no, don't do that.
Right.
But because of the way it is presented and because of just the name itself, there are a lot of components that people are unsure of, or they get defensive, or another phrase that many of us don't use anymore, but we don't shy away from it because that just makes it worse, right? The fragility component, that defensiveness that is often seen when people say something that someone might not like.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first concept. Now, with that being said, we're seeing a lot of school districts specifically really working to overcome that. And they're starting with education. And they're starting with saying, help me understand what you're struggling with. It's usually a listening tour or a town hall. We've done quite a few of those with schools across the country where we're saying, help us understand your concern. Because oftentimes the concern is not critical race theory. There's something else behind it.
Right. Yeah, they're concerned about, we don't want our children traumatized by the way it's being taught. It's like, well, none of us want our children to be traumatized. We agree. So what's the artful way to help everybody understand this without provoking shame or fragility? Right. Yeah.
And we fall into this trap a lot, especially in education, where we give something a name without just focusing on the content or the purpose. So critical race theory, I don't believe that critical race theory should be taught in our schools. The concepts of critical race theory need to be implemented and integrated because our students deserve to know accurate history as it has portrayed and how it has impacted who we are today. But theory should not be covered until you're in a senior level course or in college. And then you're describing it as the theory that is a hypothesis for why we behave the way we behave. But I am not an advocate to say, let's have a course on critical race theory. I think the problem with education is we put a name on something and then we talk about it like everyone understands it.
Right.
And we've done that in education, and corporate does it too. Everyone has their own lingo and their own vocabulary. And we assume that everyone is going to have the same definition of that vocabulary without allowing us to build a foundation first to have those conversations.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was a beautiful strategy in some ways. I mean, it's not one I necessarily subscribe to, but it was a great strategy to name something with a bunch of words, a word cluster that nobody really understood. And then to put those words out there, and particularly the part, I love what you said about theory, to put out the idea that we're teaching elementary school kids about some idea that isn't actually proven. It's like, we're going to take your students' time up right now at this tender age to help them understand this. That doesn't make sense. So thanks. That's a good, artful explanation of how you think about it in some of the work. Let's talk for a moment about, let's finish with CARES, but let's talk about corporate work and how that's different. If I'm somebody in the audience, I might be going, Well, that's great. She's got a lot of Us Squared has a lot of experience and capacity for working in schools. The skeptical businessman might say, or the business person might say, well, so they work with schools. That's very different in a corporate context, right? It's usually somebody that looks like me that says that kind of thing. So anyway, what do you notice about that? And what's your work look like? How's Us Squared's work different than the education work with corporate clients?
So I will say that our corporate work definitely has two different avenues. And most of our corporate work is either customized training. 95% of it is around implicit bias and helping to understand recruitment and retention and all of those components. But we're seeing, since we launched the CARE certification, a large chunk of our corporate clients wanting to be certified as an entity. And what we're seeing with that is people are saying, either we know the work needs to be done because it's the right thing to do, right? We saw an influx of statements being issued by corporate, especially after some of the social events that have occurred. Now, I will say that it's not that these events have recently occurred and they never happened before. Because we were stuck in a pandemic and everyone was in front of their TV, certain situations were publicized more. So people who did not have to look at that before or did not know of it, or they had the privilege to turn a blind eye previously, were not able to do that. So the Black Lives Matter movement has been around for a long time, but the Black Lives Matter movement got more traction because we were all in front of our TVs because we were quarantined and had nowhere else to go. So we're either seeing agencies, corporate institutions saying this is the right thing to do because we want to make sure our employees feel heard and the clients and customers we serve recognize that we value this work. On the other hand, whether you believe in it or not, it comes down to money as well and revenue. And more customers, more consumers today are looking at the social makeup of an organization or of a business and of their value system and their mission than they are of the product. Companies are willing to spend a little bit more for a product if they're rooted in a mission-based work. They're willing to spend a little bit more if they go into the establishment and they see people who look like them, people who remind them of themselves, people who have a vision to share with us. The most powerful commercials right now are not ones that sell a product. They talk about humanity. And what we're seeing are the corporate clients who work with us are wanting to make sure that they are value-driven, that they are showing the people that they serve and the products that they serve to, or the people that purchase their products or their services, see them as caring individuals, a company that cares, a company that focuses on people and society as a whole. So that has been the influx and the shift with corporate. We have seen a large amount of people come through and sign up for our subscription program because they don't want to be alone. They don't know how to navigate this. People were put into positions of chief diversity officers simply because of an identity group that they belong to, not because of their skill set or because of asking to be put in that position, but because they had a skin color that looked different than yours or mine, or because they were open with their sexuality not being heterosexual, or because of speaking another language, they were put into a chief diversity officer position. And they're saying, well, I can talk about my experiences, but I don't know how to motivate a whole organization to do this work.
Right.
So the subscription services have increased as well because people are saying, we just need supports. We need to know what other people are doing. And that's what we've seen an increase in.
Yeah, I love the subscription model. I'm going to have a really hard time not copying it because it's such a good idea. And it's a way to affordably get people the information they want, because again, this is kind of learner-driven education. So they get to decide what they need to learn. They can not only work with you all, great resources that you have, but also with other people in their cohort who are struggling with the same thing. So it's a brilliant idea. I'm really excited to see how it goes. And again, before we move into the CARE certification, I want to talk for a minute about we're all of us in this space that do diversity work. We're struggling with how to reconcile just keeping people focused on what they're asking us to help them with, and also how they manage the externalities of the political environment and the politicization of all of this work that, in my opinion, doesn't sometimes necessarily belong. I mean, it's like a separate conversation, but it gets brought in for understandable reasons. And we all, and leaders and organizations, are having to struggle with, what do they do with that? What are you noticing about that?
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. I often will talk about the politicization of America, right?
Yeah.
And how we don't use the phrase politically correct anymore. I mean, I remember when I was in my 20s and 30s, that was a very common phrase to use. And now we can't say that because it's almost like that's gone out, right? But at one point, I actually believe that it's good because that stems back to that first core principle, right? We need to just say things the way they are and not try to coat them to make others feel better, because then we are simply perpetuating the problem in the first place. We have too many people who stick their heads in the sand and ignore topics. Now, when we think about politics is going to be a part of every conversation because politics influence who we are as people. I have certain political beliefs. You have certain political beliefs. All of us have certain political beliefs, just like all of us have a gender identity. All of us have a racial identity. That's part of who we are. The beauty of intersectionality is that we're all very unique beings who have certain viewpoints and certain identities that make us who we are. The important piece to remember is that it's not about criminalizing or demonizing any one identity group. We at Us Squared, we have people who are extremely conservative and extremely liberal, all on our team, because it's about coming forward with respect, which is why we use the acronym JEDI instead of DEI, because we believe if we start with justice or respect, there's less of a need for that apologies and defensiveness and forgiveness when we get into more difficult concepts of equity and inclusion. No one, regardless of their identity group, regardless of their political affiliation, is going to dispute that we all deserve respect. But people, depending upon their identities and their experiences and their own privilege, could possibly dispute the inclusion component.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally hear you, and I love the way that you talk about it. My approach is a little different, not better or worse, but I tend to look at it. I want to go back to shame and that for a second, which is, let's stay out of politics if we can, and let's talk about the human emotions that people experience in the workplace, right? And one of them is fear. So and fear usually of the change of the status quo, right? And then the other is shame. And I can just tell you, as a fairly normal, acculturated US citizen, born and bred in the United States, from cisgender guy, from a Christian family, all that stuff. One of the words I never learned how to really talk about personally was shame, right? It wasn't part of my lexicon. I heard about people needing to feel ashamed, and I'm sure that my parents did their part in trying to use shame as a motivator, as many parents do in the process of learning how to be parents. But shame to me is such at the core of some of this work. And that's a hard word to bring up, because people, it's like, I don't feel shame. I feel anger. I feel upset, but I don't necessarily feel shame, because of course it's behind some of what you're talking about. So past politics, underneath politics, is what's going on. What do you feel? What are you noticing right now that makes you afraid, nervous, scared, worried? If we can get to that conversation, we're all humans,
Right. And one thing you said is that people are afraid of the changing of the status quo. I'm going to push back and say people of privilege are afraid of the changing of status quo, right?
Yes.
And people of privilege see equity as oppression. And if we have those open conversations, because as a woman, I don't want the status quo to stay the same. I want to break that glass ceiling. Right. So the fear of changing status quo comes from more privileged or majority populations, not necessarily from the people as a whole. And part of our work is making sure we include all voices without minimizing the other voices, right? So we're not here to say white men, Christian, white, cisgender men don't belong in this space.
Right.
We believe that everyone belongs in this space because we need to hear from each other, because another one of our core principles is we must tell stories to impact hearts, because hearts change minds.
Right.
Nothing I say today is going to change anyone's mind, but hopefully what I say today will impact someone's heart, and that will cause them to change their mind.
Right.
But
Great.
no one can impact someone's mind or change someone's mind. That's not,
Yeah.
unless we're a
Yeah.
mind trick, right?
Yeah. And we're not even interested in changing people's minds. We're
Right.
helping them. We're interested in helping them examine their own mindset so they can figure out what's. And I would say what you tied into about the heart part is we are, I think, about helping people remember to access their empathy, particularly people who don't have the same lived experience as part of the majority group, right? Or the people that are in the majority group, to have them understand more about what it might feel like to be somebody else.
Right.
Because, and to your point, you're right. The status quo is usually upheld by the people who are part of the dominant group, part of the insider group. And they're not aware of the different experience, the delta of experience between people who are on the inside and people who don't necessarily have the same access. So thanks for bringing that up. Absolutely. So finally, let's talk about CARES and what it is. And again, think about the listener and what they might want to know about it so that they can decide whether or not to talk to you.
Yeah. So CARES is another acronym. We've been doing this certification and offering this certification for 6 years now, 5 years. So it was before the COVID pandemic. So it's not related to the CARES Act. But it's an acronym for: with courage, acceptance, respect, and empathy, you will see success. It is a 5-module program where we cover each of those 5 words as topics to uncover and ultimately create an action plan for implementation. We offer the certification both for individuals as well as entities or organizations. So it is a phenomenal opportunity for people to not only gain information and learn material, but interact with that material and interact with other participants, and ultimately create an action plan that must be submitted for them to earn their certification. And that's what makes us a little bit different than other certification programs. There's a lot of offerings out there for DEI work, not to mention any, but there are quite a few. And what makes us different is that we have opportunities for people to engage with one another, and that if you complete all of the coursework, you are not automatically certified. You must complete an action plan and you must submit that. And then to be recertified, because it's not a lifelong certification. Individual certification is only good for 1 year. Entity or organizational certification is good for 3 years. But to be recertified, you must show growth and give a report on the original action plan that you submitted, because we want people to continue on that journey. We call it the Jedi Journey. That's actually the title of my book that I'll be releasing in hopefully a few months here. But the Jedi Journey of releasing down the way and remembering that this is a journey for all of us. There is no point of arrival. There is constantly growth available to us, and the CARE certification provides structure and support for both people and companies to continue on that Jedi journey.
So it's not a one and done program. I mean, it's an ongoing, it's a commitment, and it's a commitment to learning. It's a commitment to the journey, and it's a commitment to continuing to discover and learn what one needs to know to be effective in this work.
Absolutely.
Okay, that's great. So we're gonna put up on the screen now so you all can see just how you can get back in touch with Megan and Us Squared and some of the services they provide. And now, Megan, just want to say thank you so much for taking the time. You've done phenomenal. I'm just blown away. You've done such phenomenal work. You, and I'm sure all of your colleagues. So, this world is a better place when there are people like you doing what you're doing. And it at times that to overcome my own despondency, I need to remember that there are lots of leaders in the world who are doing what you're doing or trying to, and making a difference in their own way. So this has been Megan Fuciarelli of Us Squared Consulting, and want to just really thank you again, Megan, for being here.
Thank you for the invitation, Jim. It was great chatting with you.